Well, good evening, President Morrell, members of the board, Superintendent Turner, staff, and community members and students as well. This evening, we're here to present initial findings from the safety assessment. And the district contracted with Specialized Safety Services to conduct a school safety assessment between August and November. That finished, last week or so, I think. So Mr. Henrie Watkins of Specialized Safety Services visited every school site and district facility as part of the assessment. He'll speak momentarily regarding the findings. To set the stage, in August, we presented a safety overview for the board. During that presentation, we highlighted the district safety committee's work and focus over the last few years. Between 2018 and 2022, the district focused upon earthquake preparation, wildfire threats, the Raptor visitor implementation, COVID-19 mitigation, and cybersecurity. The work in each of these areas and others is ongoing. I'd like to take a moment to discuss the scope of our school safety assessment. So the scope for the services for the school safety assessment included completing a hazard and vulnerability assessment at every school site and district facility. Following the assessment, a report indicating trends and recommendations and providing actionable guidance will be presented. From this, the safety committee will develop focus areas for work between 2023 and 2026 school years. At this time, I'd like to introduce Henrie Watkins from Specialized Safety Services to provide the findings regarding the school safety assessment.
Good evening. As Robert mentioned, I'm Henrie Watkins. I'm an emergency manager with Specialized Safety Services. My charge was to develop a hazard identification or vulnerability assessment for the school district. And part of that required me to visit each one of the school sites, look at data, conduct interviews, and conduct quite a few observations throughout the district. And doing that, we are trying to comply with NFPA 1600, which is the national best practice for emergency management programs for school districts and other governmental bodies. The idea is to look at hazards that the district faces in 3 different areas. Natural hazards such as earthquakes, wildfires, those kinds of things, human-caused events like school shooters or active violence events, and technological issues such as IT, ransomware, and those kinds of things. Just a quick explanation of definitions. A hazard is something that can hurt you. It doesn't mean that it is going to hurt you, it just means that it has the potential to harm. The second word that we want to define is exposure, and that's usually in relationship to proximity. If that hazard gets close to the district, it becomes a threat, which is the 4th word on the definition list. We're not concerned about risk because that's kind of a numerical calculation on what are the odds of having an earthquake in the next 10 years of a certain magnitude. We're simply focused on, is there a danger out there, a hazard? Are we exposed to it? And does it represent a threat because of the proximity of that hazard to the district? Homeland Security identifies at least 18 different hazards that Southern California could be faced with. We've narrowed those down, but I want the board to be aware that there are 18 different things that can happen. The exposure issue is what we'll talk about in coming slides, but all of those things are possibilities. Natural hazards have approximately 10 options there, but earthquake and wildfire are our biggest exposures. And I'm sure that's no surprise to the board. With earthquakes, you'll see that the blue dot in the slide there represents Saddleback Valley Unified School District's location, and the surrounding areas are areas of heightened vulnerability to earthquakes and other natural disasters. The yellow color represents an area of lower risk, and I'm happy to say that Saddleback Valley Unified School District is in an area of lower risk in 2 ways. The first is in social vulnerability. There is a method of studying how people will respond to a disaster, be it natural or other cause. And in that calculation, we have determined through the federal program, federal emergency management programs calculations, that Saddleback Valley has a very low vulnerability, looking at several factors, and it has a very high resilience rate. So those are two good indicators of how we'll do. We have low vulnerability and high ability to recover from a disaster. This USGS slide talks about the different faults that surround the district. We are surrounded by faults that can produce an earthquake of 7.1 or above. We continue to find faults almost on a monthly basis. There's a new fault that was discovered running from Malibu to Dana Point that is capable of over 7.0 earthquake. But there are a number of factors that we want to look at to see how vulnerable the district is to earthquakes. While there are faults that surround us, when we look at the ground structure, we see that there's limited liquefaction areas. Liquefaction magnifies the shaking that a building will sustain during an earthquake. So that's actually good news for the district. When we look at construction, which is another one of our factors, we see that because of the extremely high standards that all schools are built within the state of California, we think that there's very little chance of an earthquake causing catastrophic collapse of any of the school buildings, which is also good news. In addition to what we're looking at for hard construction, there's something called soft construction. And soft construction are how you install bookcases, how you decorate the classroom, where you store your items. And in our school-by-school assessment of the district, we find that you also have a very, very good soft mitigation measures in effect. And so there's very little likely that things will fall off the shelf or things will fall over and hurt student staff of the district. Response capability is the fourth factor that we looked at. You do earthquake drills on a regular basis. Shakeout was just 2 or 3 weeks ago on October 20th. You participated in that. It's a good reminder for everybody on what to do if there is an earthquake. And I think the district has resources in place to respond to an earthquake. Although I am recommending that we enhance those tools to help us deal with primarily injuries that are inevitable in any earthquake. Wildfire is another one of the natural hazards that we face in this area of California. The three major factors there are vegetation or fuel, weather, and topography. And when we look at it in the context of the district, we see that many of our school sites are adjacent to wildland areas. We also are subject to red flag weather conditions, which is high wind, low humidity. And our topography finds that some of our school sites are on mid-slope roads or in canyons that tend to accelerate wind patterns. So we really need to have a strong response pattern to deal with wildland fires. And what I'm suggesting or recommending to the board is that we begin planning and, more importantly, training with our public safety partners on how to respond to a wildland fire. Specifically, we need to look at what are our trigger points that would trigger an evacuation. How would that trigger point be communicated to the district? How long does it take for us to evacuate? Where will we evacuate to? Those details need to be worked out in advance of a wildland fire and not during the wildland fire. In terms of human hazards, active violence is always something on everyone's mind, especially since Uvalde's Texas tragedy.
Yes.
With active violence, we look at a number of factors, and the first and most important factor when you're looking at the threat of active violence are relationships. Active violence does not happen randomly, and it doesn't happen to people you don't know. Most active violence against all school shootings happen because there was some kind of breakdown in the relationship at that school. And I'm very happy to report that in our observations, in our interviews, in our visits to the school site, we find that there's a very good relationship between student and students in most cases, and between staff and students. And that's the most important factor in preventing school violence. If there is a relationship that a student has with a staff person, a student can report violent behavior or threats of violence to that staff person, and there is infrastructure in place within the district to get that threat of violence dealt with. In most cases, statistics tell us, in fact, 89% of the cases, a school shooter will tell, it's called leakage, tell another student. They may not tell another staff person that they're gonna do that, but they will tell another student. And if that other student feels comfortable, they will report it to staff, and I'm happy to report that I have every indication that the other student will report it to staff, and we do have the resources and infrastructure in place to deal with that threat. The last factor is access, and that's something we need to work on as a district. The longer we can delay a school shooter from accessing the campus, the better it is for our response. Science tells us that there's roughly 30 seconds from when the shooting starts outside to when it gets inside. Research also tells us that shooters don't get past two barriers. They may look at inside windows, they may shoot through doors, but they don't get past a locked classroom door. And so what we are recommending here is that we enhance the policy that already exists in the district of having locked classroom doors with increased barriers around school sites, so that there are those two barriers. In terms of response capabilities, lockdown procedures are in place and they are practiced. We're recommending that we continue the practice and that we enhance that practicing by doing what's called reality-based training. What that means is we start the exercise from the classroom and not necessarily from the office. So a teacher would recognize a problem, they would then go through the protocol of initiating a lockdown, because that's more realistic. Lockdowns don't usually start from the office in real life. In terms of technical hazards, the biggest one we saw is IT failure, or more likely IT attack, information technology attack. That's your ransomware. LA Unified just went through a very notable case, and is still going through that notable case. With IT attack, we have to look at a number of factors. The first is how many devices are out there. Each device that's out there, each Chromebook, is a way into your systems. Over the last 2 years, you've multiplied the devices that are out there quite a bit, so there's a lot more vulnerability. The second factor is access. What kind of protections are on there if I get one of those Chromebooks? Do I have to log in? Is it two-factor authentication? And I'm happy to report the district has very good programs and procedures in place for authentication. And then detection. How fast would we determine that somebody is trying to break into our data to either steal data or to corrupt our IT operations? We have 24/7 monitoring, and there have been episodes in the past where we practiced identifying threats and addressing those threats, and we've done so very successfully. The response capability is pretty strong here at the district. We have a very responsive framework in place, and we have people who implement that response framework who have experience in doing so. So it's not their first rodeo. They know how to deal with IT failures or IT